Hey class, and thank you for viewing my PowerPoint. This is for Professor Ming's class, ENVS 504, Energy Technology, and the PowerPoint is Bioethanol, an old traditional practice that has new technological era potential. So the old traditions, history, and usages of ethanol can be dated back as far as we can see into the past. It was one of the oldest known practices. It was called the water of history. In 2100 BC, it was first distilled by the wife of King Yu of China. It had various alternative uses like antidotes for plant poisoning, bites and stings, antiseptics, anesthetics, medicines, even a fuel. It's also known as spirits, and this is the Latin word spiritus, which means breath or essence. So during the distillation process, the alcohol vapors would, lift off of the liquid, and they believed it was the spirit or essence, the breath of the product itself. And some believe that it contained mystical powers and could turn any metal into gold. A little more here on old traditions, history, and usages. The first person to create pure ethanol was in 1796, Johann Lowitz, half German, half Russian scientist. 80 years later, Nicholas Otto invented the modern four-cycle internal combustion engine, and he used ethanol to run that engine. Henry Ford was a farmer from childhood, and he would soon ensure in 1908 that every Ford Model T that came off the lot would be able to run on ethanol because it was the farmer's fuel. So his Ford Model T would actually run on kerosene, gasoline, and ethanol. There was a little switch, and you could turn the knob to which fuel you put into your vehicle. John D. Rockefeller, oil empire and tycoon, would then fund prohibition from the 1920s to 1933. Some say it was because he hated alcohol and he didn't drink himself, and this was true, but he was also a very savvy businessman, and he knew that automobiles were absolutely the future. And the one way to make sure that the public quit making their own fuel and driving their cars around and were dependent on him was to ensure that prohibition won in all the states. So there's a couple news articles there on the right. This was a fuel of the private citizen. It was something that we could all do in our backyards. So here we are, the conversion process of bioethanol. This is going to be a six-slide, six-phase presentation here. I'm trying to, at the end of this, I want to teach you how you can make your own ethanol. It's going to be geared towards industrial purposes, but you'll see on the right, these are all my own photos. This is all my own experimentation. So phase one is gathering your feedstock, gathering the materials needed like starches, sugars, corn, wheat, fruit, vegetables, sugar beet, sugar cane, lignocellulosic waste derived from agriculture feedstocks, wheat husk, rice straw, corn stover, switchgrass, woodmill waste. And then we're going to transport these materials favorably to local sites, but sometimes we have to transport them a little bit further. Some of these materials have longer shelf lives than other, but at the end of the day, even if the fruit specifically, because that rots the fastest, goes bad and starts rotting, we can still put this through hydrolysis and steam expulsion, kill that bad bacteria, and then put it through enzymatic hydrolysis and break down those pectin structures and cellulose structures and still turn this into ethanol. So just because it rots doesn't mean we have to throw it out. So phase two here of the conversion process is a little bit complicated, but fairly straightforward once you get the hang of it, and that's just the pre-treatment of biomass. And there are several ways to pre-treat the biomass. Acid hydrolysis has been the favorable method for decades upon decades, and that's just putting your biomass into a large pressure cooker or large boiler vessel with an acid in it. For home use, you might use vinegar. That vinegar or acid then breaks down the pectin structures or the cellulose structures, allowing the sugar content to become available. Through the modern day, we are now using enzymatic hydrolysis, and that's just the bioengineered enzymes that are heat tolerant and pressure tolerant, and we can stick them into the boilers vessels with the biomass, and they can do their job while we're pressure cooking this biomass. And what we have from those enzymes is a complete rupture of the sugar chain cycles, taking them from polys to monosaccharides. And for the really heavy agriculture dedicated energy crops, complex structures. We use steam expulsion, and we basically put these in a big vessel with highly pressurized steam for some time, and really quickly we evacuate all of the pressure in that vessel. And as it depressurizes, the internal moisture of that crop or of that plant then ruptures into steam, thus splitting that cellulose structure apart right at the core of it. So pretty cool process. And then we go through and do the enzymatic hydrolysis and so on and so forth. Okay. So now we're on to the third process here of bioethanol, and this is phase 3, fermentation. It's definitely my favorite step. I love the aroma that comes out of the fermenter when you're breaking down your wash. There are many types of yeast that can be used to achieve fermentation. Saccharomyces cerevisiae is the yeast most commonly used for alcohol making. It's otherwise known as baker's yeast or brewer's yeast. It's what allows your bread to rise when you're baking a loaf of bread. It's a unicellular fungus, and it's been used in wine making and beer making since the beginning of time. But today's yeast are genetically enhanced, and depending on what you're trying to achieve, we can gain alcohol by volume in our tubs here by nearly 20 or 30%, so up to 15 proof just from fermenting. That's really strong. You wouldn't want to drink that really, but unless you refined it into a spirit. But anyways, today's bioethanol market, they're using genetically modified yeast that are capable of breaking down cellulosic structures, lignocellulosic structures, and simple sugars all at the same time. So we can combine all these elements, break them all down in the fermenter. We don't need to segregate our biomass anymore, and it just really enhances the process and efficiency of which bioethanol can be achieved. And so here you see my tubs, my 6-gallon tubs with the airlocks on the top, and those airlocks right there are where you would catch the CO2 coming out of the fermenter. So, and really basic methodology for this would just be putting a balloon on top of the airlock, and as the airlock bubbles up the CO2 coming from the fermenter, you would then capture that in the balloon, and the balloon would get bigger and bigger and bigger over the course of 7 to 10 days, and thus you'd have your CO2 captured and not re-released back into the atmosphere. So on to phase 4 here. I'm going to speak a little fast because there's a lot to cover on this phase, but this is the distillation phase, and there's multiple types of distillation units that we can use, reflux stills, pot stills, continuous column stills with purification thumper buckets. There's azeotropic distillation where we add a volatile compound into the mixture that alters the boiling points of water and ethanol to achieve a more pure and streamlined product at the end. Then just in general, ethanol boils are around 172 to 212 degrees Fahrenheit, and water boils at 212. So when you have your unit a little bit pressurized, you raise the rate of which water boils to about 225, 230, and then we can really boil off that ethanol, and it rises up through the columns. Off here to the right, you can see all the various different stills that I built over the course of this thesis, trying to achieve the highest amount of alcohol by volume that I can get. The picture down here at the bottom left is the copper reflux tubing that I bent around a 1-inch diameter push broom. Once I filled it up with sand, I was able to curve it, and that's going to be filled with cold water in the column, and as the alcohol vapors rise and they hit that continuous spun column of copper, they condense and fall back down into the pot and then reboil over and over until we get a much more purified product of ethanol vapors, where only the best vapors come across the top of that coil and into the chute and down into the worm bucket, where they then condense into a cool liquid and we get our ethanol. And with that last picture at the bottom, that's still there, that's called a forced reflux still. I was able to pull 190 proof off of that, so 95% alcohol by volume. Only the best reflux stills in the world can get about 194 proof. They look a lot fancier than that, but indeed they only get you about 4 more proof or another 2% higher in alcohol by volume. So I think I achieved the best I could do here, and I'm pretty happy with it. Okay, phase 5 here. This is after distillation, where we have our, between our 185s and our 190 proof ethanols. So at this point, we do something called dehydration because we have to remove the rest of the H2O that's still remaining, which is roughly 5 to 6% in the ethanol solution before it can be considered for final product or commercial grade. We use the molecular sieves, and they're basically just small clay or ceramic beads. And from that picture below, we can see they come in different shapes and sizes. But these molecular sieves are they have thousands of tiny little microscopic holes known as angstroms. And an angstrom at 2.7 5-inch diameter would be that of H2O, and an angstrom in diameter of 3.6 would be that of ethanol. So basically, if we have a molecular sieve that is 3A or 3 angstroms in diameter, we will then absorb only the smaller 2.75 diameter H2O out of the larger molecule of 3.6 ethanol, and what we're left with is 100% or 200 proof ethanol, and then it's considered an industrial grade product. You can also do this with copper sulfate, but it's not used by industry due to various complications. The cool thing about these molecular sieves is that when they get overhydrated with H2O, they can be removed, stuck in the oven or in a big heating element and dehydrated and then reused again. So they're very cost effective and have a long lifespan. Okay, folks, so here is phase 6, and this will conclude our process of bioethanol. It's a 3-step process. Once we have our 100 proof ethanol, we then need to denature that. So we need to render it undrinkable or unusable by human consumption. Often, whatever the end user needs in this ethanol is what they'll denature it with. So wherever they're going to ship it, what they're going to use it for, they're going to use certain molecules to denature it that makes sense for that user. So methanol and gasoline are the primary products that they'll denature ethanol with. Once it's denatured, it is then post-processed and basically filtered one last time to make sure all impurities are removed, and then it's stored and shipped to the final destination. And all of these steps are designed to meet regulatory requirements and ensure product quality. Environmental and societal benefits are immense. We can bridge a gap between fossil fuels and citizens. We can create a fuel that is carbon neutral, huge reductions in atmospheric pollution if it was indoctrinated throughout the transportation sector, energy and sustainable energy through agricultural waste, additional agricultural opportunities in rural developed areas, great for recycling biomass. Leftover ethanol waste is then turned into feedstock for cattle, and it often produces a much more nutritious feedstock. The CO2 is easily captured during the fermentation process and reallocated. Biodegradable ethanol production is far less toxic to the environment and in case of a potential spillage. And so here on the right, super simple trick here, 2 glass jars. One of them is full of 10 milliliters of gasoline, and one of them is full of 10 milliliters of 187 proof ethanol. I'll let you figure it out. The ethanol burned about 5 minutes to 6 minutes, and the gasoline only burned for about 35, 40 seconds. A lot more combustion in the gas, but look at the amount of soot left over. And then in the ethanol, absolutely nothing, burned clean. And when you would smell these 2 glass jars, I assure you that I did, the ethanol was sweet, it smelled good, it smelled right, and the gasoline was putrid. So our greenhouse gas potential on ethanol is actually quite considerable. It is known to be carbon neutral, and what that basically means is that when we're growing these crops, when we're growing this biomass, a lot of it's going to be used as feed, but in general, these crops are considered carbon sinks. They're pulling carbon out of the air. They're using the sunlight as photosynthesis to combine with carbon to grow this crop and putting this carbon into the biomass of the crop, but what's left over is then stuffed into the soil. That extra carbon goes down in the soil, and then it's broken down by fungi that degrade the carbon, and they return the nutrients back to the soil. So once we then process the plant for ethanol, we can then capture that existing CO2 through the fermenting process and reallocate it, like I already said. And then when we're burning this fuel, we are getting some CO2 that is burning off of it, but it's just H2O and CO2. And as you saw in the experiment before, obviously so much cleaner than gasoline. There's just no question. And we're able to give back to nature what we take out. It's a great way to go. A lot of good greenhouse gas potential here. There have been a lot of challenges of full-scale adoption for bioethanol in the last 100 years. They've never let off of this issue, but overall, seasonal variability issues of using certain crops for fuel, land use issues, the food versus fuel fight, which is purely political. You can read number 4 if you'd like. Water rights, lack of infrastructure and funding is the biggest, in my opinion. Dedicated pipelines for ethanol, that's an issue. We don't have many, but we could potentially be reusing the ones that we already have. And of course, suppressed green technology that anyone can be a part of. And so just the pictures on the side here, I like that cartoon will work for food. I think that's supposed to be a play on for poverty, but here's your food, your gasoline, your corn ethanol. But the picture below that is just the opposite. Look at all of the food that is wasted. We throw away so much food in America and in other countries around the world. And if we had a program to collect this food and allocate it into bioethanol plants that were locally distributed, we could be increasing jobs, making fuel in the cities in which we reside in. We wouldn't have to use commerce to ship this crude oil across the oceans and over 4, 5, 6,000 miles of land where there's spillage and there's protests and they break these pipelines. Anyways, clean, and we can do it inner city and create jobs. Good way to go. So the new technological era potential for bioethanol. There's a lot to break down on this slide. I'm not going to go into it all in detail, but in general, we can make ethanol from crop residues, food waste, wood mill waste, lignocellulosic structures, and we can do that all at once in the same boiler. And a lot of that is because our genetically enhanced yeasts and enzymes that allow us to do that. We can even break down municipal solid waste. I think we all know what I'm trying to say. Yes, we can even break that down and turn it into ethanol. And then the residual of that waste could then be utilized as fertilizers. The algae biomass is coming online huge right now. I'm sure everybody in this class knows about all the different types of algae and duckweed that we're making, and this stuff doubles in size overnight. It has huge potentials for ethanol. It's simple sugars and proteins, and we don't even need to put it through hydrolysis to get it to ferment. It's ready to go. That's a great necessity for ethanol. So anybody can do this fairly easily with a little bit of ambition and motivation. If you have fruit trees and a garden, you can make ethanol. You don't need to make a lot of it. You can run your lawnmower on probably 160 proof and up. So if you can get yourself a still and make yourself 160 proof ethanol, you can run that lawnmower. So now you have fuel for your lawnmower. Good luck. Okay, we've reached the end, the conclusion. This is a highly promising fuel with a lot of future prospect. It's been left behind for 80 years of technological build out. Ever since Prohibition, we just lost a ton of time, about 80 years. We started getting really big into ethanol again about 30 years ago. But imagine where we would be at if we never left it behind. You can even make plastic out of ethanol instead of petroleum. It's truly a closed loop system. It gives back and cleans up what we take out of nature. So from waste to energy, it is and always was a leader in the green energy sector, even if big business never claimed it was. So let me know if you ever want to make ethanol, and even if you don't, now you know it's possible that anyone at their home can make ethanol. And so right here is my hydrometer where you can see I clearly hit 190 proof. And I just wanted to reiterate those pictures of gasoline versus ethanol burning right there in the 2 glass jars. And then thanks, Professor Mink, for coming out several times and visiting and looking at the project, and really appreciate your help. Everyone have a great day. Take care. Bye.